Hi folks, we're at Module 2 and we're looking at the Novice solutions. And we're going to look at just one problem this time because there's a lot to it, the pivot table problem, problem 9. So let's get out of here and go to our worksheet. A lot to do. Pivot analysis is something that used to be called cross-tabulation. Cross-tabulation is a technique that looks at the intersection of various variables. If you look at our data, our port data from before, you'll see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4 variables, actually 5 if you consider the observation. One might be interested in asking the question, what was the tonnage that was provided at the port of Charleston by NYK? Well, here's one observation that includes Charleston and NYK. Here's another, and there are likely to be many, many more. Of course, this list could be thousands or tens of thousands of files. So looking and finding those by sorting or by just picking them out with eyeballing it could be very, very difficult. Pivot analysis allows us to create a format for asking those kinds of questions. It's a highly structured sort of activity. There are 4 areas that we put in information. The central area is something called the values area. Generally, what goes in the values area is a number or numbers. So you are likely to see number of 40-foot containers or tons in that area. We'll see where the values area is later, but it's in this area right here. Then we put in column labels and row labels. These are invariably categorical variables like EG or NYK. They're a designation in a categorical sort of a way. For example, M stands for Maersk, VA stands for Virginia. So we put some along this margin and along this margin. And then finally, there's the opportunity to put in a filter here, which says, I want to look at all this stuff, but I want to filter out some things. In this particular case, I want to look at the number of 40-foot containers. Let's say I'm just interested in the number of 40-foot containers that were greater than 30,000. You can see some values less than 30,000 here and some greater. And I'm just interested in those values that are greater. So I could further divide the data into smaller and smaller segments. So how do we do that? Well, we create a pivot table by first of all going to the Insert menu. Here is our pivot table. It gives us information. It wants to know where's our data. Our data obviously is going to be this area here. I'm not going to include the observation. In some cases that might be important, but for us it's not. So there's the data. Then it says, where do you want it? I want it in the existing worksheet, and I'm going to put my solutions over here next to the ones that I've already done so we can see the example. So I want my solution or table to be right here. Hit OK. Then I hit OK. And what happens is that 2 things. There's this picture of, okay, you're going to put something in this area. And then there's this field area over here for working the variables that you're going to be using in the various areas of the pivot table. Remember I talked about values. We're interested in tons. So I'm going to grab tons. I right-click it or left-click it and bring it down into this area. And there it is. Now I wanted a port, and I wanted that in the column area, or I put it in the column area. I could have put it in the row area, but I know I wanted the port and the shipper, and so it'll agree with the what I had over here. And we can see that what we've done is we've developed this table right away. I'm going to center things because it drives me crazy to see these things uncentered. So here's our table. Let me see if I can move this. May not be able to. Hold on. See if I can move it down. Yep, there we go. There are pull-down menus in this area. What if I only wanted to look at NYK and EG? Hit OK, and we limit. You see this little filter in the row. It says, OK, we filtered. And I can come back and say, no, you know what? Select all. I want to go back to all. Same thing with the column. Maybe I'm just interested in Charleston and Jacksonville because I'm interested in as far south as I can get. Hit OK. All right. What I asked for in the question was not the sum of tons, but I wanted to know the count of records that are associated with Virginia and NYK for these tons. And by that I mean how many of these observations here, these records, qualify to be NYK delivering something to Baltimore. You can see there it is, 4. Virginia and NYK, there were 10. So more frequent delivery by NYK or schedules into Virginia, Port of Virginia by NYK. So how do we get that? How do we make those counts of those records? Well, if we go back to our data and I right-click it, I get a table and it says summarize by sum, that's the sum of those tons, but I can also do count. And what count allows us to do is to count the number of records in our database that meet that specification. Baltimore and NYK, Charleston and NYK, Maersk and Virginia, etc. You know, by the way, you can get rid of this thing if you don't want it. And if you do want it, put your cursor in the table and say show field. Okay. One other thing that I want to do is I want to bring this 40-foot containers into this area here. I'm going to use it later, so I'm going to bring it down. And we can filter according to what we want here. For example, I told you before, what if I'm interested only in the number of 40-foot containers that correspond to those tons that were greater than 30,000? In other words, find a number that I would uncheck that box for all, and I'd start counting from here down. A little tedious because there might be many entries, but you can do it. All right, so that's how we create this table. Accompanying the table is also a chart. You can turn this into a chart. If you go over here to this hidden pivot table menu that's in the background here, it's pink on my machine, and I hit, I left click it, I see an icon for tools that says pivot chart. Here's a pivot chart that I want. I double click that, and voila, there it is. I've got a chart now of this area, of this tabular information, rather than just the tabular information. It may be easier to look at a chart. Okay. And by the way, the chart also has pull-down menus that say, you know what, if you want to filter something, you can. What if I only want to look at Baltimore and Charleston? Hit OK, and there we go. Only Baltimore and Charleston. So if you're in a meeting and somebody asks you, you know, well, I'm interested only in these things, you know, how do you respond to that? You say, sure, let me show you, and make the adjustments in the presentation as you go in real time. The next question says, all right, I'm interested in the relative total of tons for Jacksonville that are due to shipper M. So I'm interested in Jacksonville and shipper M, and I want it in a percentage, okay? So the first thing I need to do is go back to my table and say, I don't need to count anymore. I need the tons again. I go down to summarize by values, and I go to sum. That gives me the tons. And so what I'm looking for is the percentage of tons by Maersk at, what was it, Jacksonville. So really, what's the percentage? What percentage is this number, 890,300, of the total tonnage in Jacksonville? You could do the arithmetic you want right away, if you know, just use a calculator and do that. Or you can do the following. I can right click it again, come down here to show values as, and if I go and I want the to be a percentage of the column total, because the column is what's important here: Baltimore, Charleston, Jacksonville. So I do that, and what did I ask for? I asked for the intersection of Jacksonville and Mersk, and there it is, 14.5. In fact, that's what we got here, 14.5. Very, very powerful capabilities of slicing, dicing data very easily. The last problem asks, all right, I want to repeat C, but this time I only want to consider the number of 40-foot containers greater than 25,000. What is that percentage? So somebody says, look, we're not interested in that penny ante sort of stuff. Give me just the containers greater than 25,000. That's why I put my filter in here. So I go here, I hit, I'm going to select multiple items. They're all clicked now. I'm going to unclick this, this. As I said, it appears to be tedious, but as soon as I get to 25,000, I'm going to be able to quit. I'm sure I'll be happy to do so. We're almost there. So we want 25,000 or greater. Looks like we're zeroing in. And there we go. Everything that's checked now is 25,000 or greater. I hit OK, and notice what happens now. These percentages change. Why? Because I threw some of the data out. I said don't consider those records where the value of the 40-foot containers was less than 25,000. And again, I could make a chart of this. How would I do that? I left click on the table. I go to the menu up here that's in the background, hit pivot chart, and there's my chart, and I'm ready to clip that chart, put it into a presentation, put it into some sort of communication, and make my my sterling presentation to the board of directors and get that raise and retire early. There we go. That's the end of it. I know it's a long one. There's a lot there. Maybe one of the 3 or 4 most powerful tools in the bag or the suite of Excel tools. That concludes our presentation.